the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, very long shadows of victory cast by the sunset of the gods of the copybook-heading apprentices, putting the mass in mass market. Plus, we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Drake's The Sea Without a Shore, all right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen editor Tony Daniel. Hey, we've got the start of a fascinating, massive, and amazing interview with David Weber, talking about his fascinating, massive, and amazing new entry in the Honor Harrington series, Shadow of Victory. This is part one of a three-part interview, an interview that's so much of a blockbuster that it will span 2 months, so that's coming up. And we also continue with the complete audiobook serialization of The Sea Without a Shore by David Drake. Here's the news. Hey, we often tout the Baen.com monthly contest about this time of month on the podcast. This month we have a doozy, and it has gotten lots of entries. This is the way we worded it at the beginning of the month, and by we I mean copywriter David F. Sherrod. It's election season this November in America, and millions of folks will head to the polls to vote in the presidential race. You may well know who you're voting for, but what if the election were open to a wider range of candidates? Specifically, which Baen book character would you elect President of the United States? Tell us who and why in a short paragraph, 100 words or less, and be entered to win a signed copy of Michael Z. Williamson's Angel Eyes, the new installment in his Freehold series. So now we know who won. I'm not going to say who, since I don't want to spoil the fun of finding out for medieval time travelers who happen to be listening to this podcast from the past. But the contest at Baen.com is still open and will be until November 25th, a very auspicious date in the history of this republic, I must say. So if you are okay with the election, or if you wish you could join those street protests against the winner, but because you are a Baen reader, actually have a job as a productive citizen and haven't got the time to get out there at the moment, send in your entry for a Baen book character you would vote for Prez, and a few sentences explaining why. The entries will be subject to the Baen Editorial Electoral College, and the winner will get Angel Eyes by Michael Z. Williamson, which honestly is probably a more enjoyable prize than the presidency anyway. Details are on the main page at Baen.com, so go ye there and let your opinion of Baen character greatness be heard across the stars. This is part one of a three-part interview with David Weber discussing his new Honor Harrington novel, Shadow of Victory. Part 2 will be available next time on the podcast. I want to welcome David Weber back to the podcast. Hello, David.
Hello, Tony.
So David Weber is the creator of the internationally best-selling Honor Harrington series and the Honorverse. David's Honor Harrington science fiction novels have sold millions of copies over the years. David is also the author of many, many other Baen books, including epic fantasy, Basel series entry like The Sword of the South, which starts a new sub-series within that series. It's a great book. That's coming out very soon in mass market, by the way. He's the co-author of lots of books, too, with Timothy Zahn and Thomas Pope. He's the creator of the Manticore Ascendant series. That's an Honorverse book, including Call to Duty and A Call to Arms. And lately with Joel Presby, he's continued his multiverse science fiction and fantasy blend series with Book 3, The Road to Hell. David has had, I think Marla counted, 28 New York Times bestsellers, and there are over 8.5 million David Weber books in print. The latest entry in the Honor Harrington series is a solo novel by David Weber. That book is Shadow of Victory and is now at booksellers everywhere. So in the two previous books in the main Honor Harrington series, David, A Rising Thunder and Shadow of Freedom, the Talbot sector, which is a big part of the, I guess it's, I'll ask you about this. The Verge is the outer ring of the Solarians. All right. the Talbot sector was in upheaval, and Manticore was pulled in by a Meson alignment plot, and we mainly Admiral Goldpeak was our was one of our heroines in that one. Meanwhile, in the Crown of Slaves trilogy that you wrote with Eric Flint, Victor Zilwicki and Nanton Zilwicki and Victor Shakot exposed the alignment's perfidy. And Shadow Victory seems to be where these two series are converging. Am I right with that?
More or less. Okay, let me backtrack just a little bit
and
here.
Correct anything, yes, please.
Yeah, but what the Talbot sector, which is now the Talbot Quadrant, did was to turn the Star Kingdom of Manticore into the Star Empire of Manticore because of Talbot's voluntary association with Manticore, which stemmed largely from Talboters' disinclination to be ingested by the Solarian League and the transstellar corporations that exploit their economies. One thing I think some people may have missed on the way in is that it's not just the transstellars which are exploiting their economies, that in fact that's a secondary effect of the deliberate policy of the bureaucrats who run the Solarian League. Because of the way that the Solarian Constitution is established, there is a specific provision which was designed to keep the government from becoming some sort of behemoth, which precludes them from charging taxes. The only way that they can fund government operations is by charging service fees for maintaining deep space traffic control, policing economy, the economy, export and import fees, etc. And the reason it was set up that way is that the Solarian League was really intended to be more of a trade association, more of a common market than a European Union, if I may use that analogy, that got out of hand. Mm-hmm. And has no effective elective political oversight. It's basically run by the permanent bureaucrats who never have to face the electorate and can always hide behind the elected officials who they theoretically are subordinate to. So none of these individual fringe systems that the Office of Frontier Security is helping to protect from themselves is actually a huge source of revenue. But collectively, they are something like a third of the Solarian government's total revenues. So when potential sources of revenue start going over to the Star Kingdom of Manticore, this is upsetting to the regulators running the league.
So it's kind of the parasitic relation between, or crony capitalism or something like that, or crony socialism kind of relationship between these transstellar corporations and the Solarian League bureaucracy.
Yeah, I mean,
they're all one of a kind or of a kind.
Get it? The transstellars get a huge sweetheart deal, and they peel off maybe 8-10% of their sweetheart profits to help finance the system that provides the other 80 to 90% of sweetheart profit to them. Okay, so it's almost more of a symbiotic than a parasitic relationship from the perspective of the league government and the bureaucrats who run it and their transstellar buddies. All right. Now the reason that Talbot was able to seek annexation by the Star Kingdom is the discovery of another terminus of the Manticore and Wormhole Junction in very close proximity to the Talbot sector. It's not quite inside it. In fact, the star system that it's closest to, which is the closest inhabited star system, which is the system of Lynx, is not part of the Talbot Quadrant. It is part of the core Star Kingdom of Manticore because it can be reached almost instantaneously via the junction, and the Talbot quadrant cannot. It is within easy travel through normal hyperspace, but there is still going to be a significant delay. I think it's about 10 days in the turnaround of messages between the quadrant and the star empire. So the quadrant was organized basically in what you might call a federalized model, and has autonomy in several areas, and is basically a subunit of the Star Empire, with representation in the new imperial parliament and so forth, but with its own quadrant parliament to handle local affairs. However, this wormhole junction, the Lynx terminus of the junction, is also only about 150, 200 light years from Mesa. And Mesa is the home of the Mason alignment, which has been planning for 400, 500, 600 years to basically overthrow the League and establish a new interstellar power under its aegis that will be able to advance its platform, its program of systematic genetic uplift of the human race.
They want to establish humanity 2.0 that's going to be extremely stratified, just horrible society, right? I mean, they're the bad guys.
Well,
although not anybody in a David Weber novel is nuanced if they're a bad guy, but
well, I try, because bad guys usually are in real life. But you can think of the Alpha Line members of the Mason alignment as the vanguard of the genotype, in parallel with the vanguard of the proletariat under Marxism. They are the group which will naturally provide leadership to the rest of humanity until the rest of humanity catches up with their modifications. But like all the other lines, the alpha lines will be subject to constant tweaking and improvement, and therefore the gap will never close, and therefore we will perpetuate the alpha line's control of the human race in general, because obviously it is quantifiably genetically superior to anybody else. I mean, it's not going to be like the bogus hocus-pocus racism, scientific racism of the 19th and the early 20th century. This is going to be, look, we got the two genotypes side by side. This alpha guy has 50 more points of IQ than you do. He's going to live 15 years longer than you are, et cetera. It's going to be a quantifiable difference. And that's one of the reasons that people like Beowulf, where Honor Harrington's mom is from, have been so bitterly opposed to this type of genetic improvement for so long, because they see it as constituting the re-emergence of racism, which has been pretty much wiped out by this time. I mean, we're 2,000 years down the road. Okay, racism is not really a factor. Instead, the racist sentiment is largely focused on the genetic slaves, which have been produced by manpower and are considered to be genetically off the reservation, not quite human by a lot of people. But the focus of the Mason alignment for many years was the Republic of Haven, because what it was worried about was an existing vibrant power center outside the League, which would pose competition to their effort to build a new polity on the ruins of the Solarian League, if you follow me. Mm-hmm. And for 150 years, that was the Republic of Haven. And the Republic of Haven took this really ugly left turn as the result of a deal between corrupt politicians and corrupt machine political vote managers, the Duelist managers, Many people think that in structuring what happened to the Republic of Haven, I was saying that any form of social assistance for any citizen inevitably leads to the collapse of all civic virtue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you go back and look, it was the result of self-serving politicians manipulating the system that created the disaster known as the People's Republic of Haven. It wasn't the inherent desire to provide for all members of a society a decent living, good medical care, a decent education, even if this requires state intervention in some levels. It was the way in which that intervention was manipulated and twisted for the political ends of a specific group that created the People's Republic of Haven. And what the galaxy at large doesn't know is that quite a bit of that manipulation was the result of input from the Mason Alliance, working behind the scenes deliberately to destroy Haven as this vibrant Renaissance economic power. And unfortunately for their plans, Haven got into a shooting war with the Star Kingdom of Manticore, and the Star Kingdom of Manticore basically, even though it hasn't realized it for a while, could kick the Solarian League's military butt totally, solely by itself. And I think even some of the readers maybe haven't figured out yet. I don't know that. And if they haven't, they're in good company, because there's a bunch of folks in the Solarian League who haven't figured it out either. That despite the huge size of the Solarian League and its ability to absorb incredible damage and rebuild, etc., Manticore by itself, before the Masons launched their sneak attack that destroyed so much of its orbital industry, all by itself, Manticore could have defeated everything the Solarian League had militarily, simply because of the quantum leaps in military technology and warfighting capability that 20 years of fighting the People's Republic has brought about. But the Mason alignment did realize that Manticore represented this existential military threat to its plans. And then we see the Talbot Quadrant blooming over here, and all of a sudden Manticore also becomes a threat to the alignment's intention of building a new political center that will be created primarily as a defensive measure after the collapse of the Solarian League. The idea is that we will band together a few star systems at a time, and to sort out the chaos, to form a new and more perfect union, et cetera, then this will gradually become the competing power center for what's left of the Solarian League. Well, now, all of a sudden, if Manticore is going to add like 20 star systems in one whack, Manticore clearly is a significant threat as a competing political power. So they have all kinds of reasons to want to take the Star Kingdom down a peg. And it's also why the Mason alignment tried systematically to undermine and prevent the Talbot Quadrant from voting to join the Star Kingdom in the first place, which led to the events in Shadow of Saganami, which were really the first book that focused on the Talbot Quadrant coming out of it.
The action in the Crown of Slaves books is in the area called the Verge, and it's on Mesa as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in Shadow of Victory, Shadow of Freedom, sorry, those are Verge planets that are rebelling against the Transstellars that have gotten control of their economy, or the Solarian League's heavy-handedness.
Yeah, well, okay. Basically, the Solarian League and its areas of influence. Okay, the Solarian League is kind of like China was in its worldview before Western. Well, probably still is, really. I mean, because that kind of concept of who you are and what you are is programmed into the DNA of nations and of self-recognized national groups. But China was the center of the world. Everything else was a periphery attached to China. I think some people would like to see America that way these days, and they've usually gotten us into a lot of trouble when when they tried to do that. But the Solarian League has genuinely seen the galaxy, the explored galaxy, in that light for at least the last 3-4 centuries, with some justification given the sheer size and economic power and so forth of the League. The League just hasn't realized how many rats are crawling around in the woodwork, and they also haven't realized that those weird guys with the round eyes and the sailing ships and the cannon are about to overturn their comfortable view of themselves as undisputed master of all they survey. So within the Solarian League's view of the diaspora of humanity, you have the core worlds, which are the oldest, most populous, most powerful individually star systems, and almost all of whom, not all of whom at this point, but almost all of whom were founding members of the League. And then you have what they call the shell, and those are star systems which are what we would think of today as first world nations within the Solarian League. They have that degree of economic and military, well, not so much military because they belong to the League, but economic and political clout of first world nations that are also states in a federal system. There's not an exact analogy that we can use from Earth's politics. But beyond the shell is the verge. And the verge is where you have the more sparsely populated. And when we say sparsely in the Honorverse, we may be talking about, 4 billion people. Is sparsely populated because with Honorverse technology, the entire star system is available to you, including orbital habitats and industry and the whole 9 yards. But that's what the fringe is, and what Frontier Security has been doing for quite some time is gradually extending the Solarian League's tentacles out into the fringe, sort of sucking up one star nation after another as soon as there's a pretext for them to move in with basically the blue helmets to restore order and so forth. And then, of course, they will withdraw as soon as the local star system has compensated the Solarian League for its expenses, since it doesn't have a tax base. It has to charge user fees, so it will charge them user fees, and as soon as it gets everything paid down, of course, they'll hand the system back over to them. But it's kind of like owing money to the company store. You can't pay it down. It's structured that way. The principal always increases, and so you are, in effect, in perpetual debt slavery to OFS. And OFS, in turn, greases the skids for the transnationals, the transstellars in this case, to come in and exploit the star systems as well. But don't think that all of the folks who are doing the exploiting are Solarians or even have anything to do with Frontier Security. You also have star systems with ingrained elites who are just as manipulative of their citizens as the Solarian League would be of the star system as a whole. These are kind of like the kleptocracy you see in a lot of second and third world countries. The people who are close enough to the seats of political power that they control the levers of political power, and they manipulate the system for their own and their family advantage. And so even if you have a star system that would never, oh no, we have no aristocracy in this star system, we're a democracy, what they frequently are is in fact a facade democracy. And instead of dukes and earls, they have presidents and CEOs. And this is not just me dealing with my paranoia. This is actually based on human behavior time after time.
I mean, one reads a lot of your books, and you don't base them directly on history, but there's all kind of historical precedents that you're bringing in, and it seems clear that there are some comparisons being made.
Well, it's less direct comparisons than it is my understanding based on I fell in love with history in the 5th grade. Okay, and in the 5th grade, I was only 10 because I was 5 when I started school. So that would have been 54 years ago. So I spent a half century in love with history. And if you ever are unfortunate enough to be trapped in the room with me at a convention, you may find that out. But what that has given me is, sure, I've got this incredible horde of political analogies that I can pull out. But what it's done more than that is to give me a feel for the process by which decisions are made and in which societies move. And one thing that history will tell you is that human nature today is very much what it was at the time of Thucydides. The political matrix, the particular matrix in which that human nature may express itself has changed immeasurably. But the individual motivations and the individual tendencies, if you sat down at one, if you went to the Peloponnesian War and you sat down in one of the city-state assemblies and listened to the discussion, the politics going back and forth, looked at the political cabals being formed and so forth, a machine politician from Chicago would feel right at home. Okay? I'm just saying. And that translates into my view of what humanity is going to be like in the future as well. And it's kind of like one thing that I think is absolutely true is Heinlein's view on what happens when somebody decides they ain't going to study war no more. If you go back to, I think actually Tolkien said it very well when he has Éowyn say, those who do not have swords can still perish upon them. And that's kind of where the Star Kingdom and now Star Empire of Manticore is. They never wanted to be a military superpower. King Roger, who started the build-up, which allows the Solarian, allows the Star Empire to survive when it finally does have to go toe-to-toe with this huge, relatively speaking, People's Republic of Haven, never wanted to go to war. He simply saw no alternative that wasn't worse than going to war for the subjects whose lives he was responsible for, the citizens whose lives he was responsible for. And that really, I think, informs probably the majority of the Weberonian good guys. It's not that they want to go to war. It's that they don't see an alternative. And I do find nobility in people who voluntarily choose to be, as Heinlein said, greater love hath no man than a mother cat dying to defend her kittens. The individual who is willing to take that onus, that willingness to be our scapegoat in many regards and do the dying for us to preserve the things that we believe are important. I find a certain inherent nobility in that. Now, do I think they're all saints? Hell no, I've known too many of them. Okay. But I think that they're George Orwell. Okay, this is a paraphrase, but he said, we sleep soundly in our beds tonight because rough men stand ready to do violence in our name. And that, unfortunately, is true today. It's as true as it was at the time of Thucydides. It's just the power blocks are bigger, and the consequences, if you lose, may be even worse. But it hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And it hasn't changed in the honor verse either.
Well,
that's the way in which history really informs what I'm doing. Although I will admit, I deliberately used the French Revolution as a red herring where the People's Republic of Haven was concerned. I deliberately threw in all kinds of allusions to the French Revolution and character names and that kind of thing. That made them, oh, here comes Napoleon, and everybody thought it was going to be Esther McLean, and then I killed her. And they're like, wait, where did Napoleon go? And they never saw Tom Theismann coming as Cincinnatus instead of Napoleon, as the guy who was going to say, you know what, I really am going to restore the system that worked for 300 years.
Well, you gave
without taking power myself.
You have an alternate French Revolution that worked, kind of, actually, if they got it George Washington instead of Napoleon, perhaps.
Well,
but,
because what you actually got was somebody who undid the what. Okay.
Well, I mean, coming in after the bad stuff of the anyway. Perhaps not a good.
And one other thing I should say is that the guys who Theismann came in and basically overthrew to recreate to bring the original Constitution of the Republic of Haven back actually did a lot of good for for reinvigorating the economy and the educational system, really, of the Republic of Haven. It's just that they did it by sailing down rivers of blood to accomplish their goals. And whether it would have been possible to go another way, we will never know, because they didn't choose that route. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And again, maybe that's that nuanced villains thing that you're talking about, but Robespierre never wanted to kill millions, hundreds of thousands, millions of people in pursuit of his own reform goals. He found himself in the saddle of a hungry tiger that eventually did devour him. And Theismann is the guy who was able to come in and basically shoot the tiger and then build on the ruins of what Pierre did manage to accomplish. I don't know if you can tell or not, but there's a huge amount of subtext to what's going on in these books that is firmly established in my mind, a lot of which, despite my infamous info dumps, never gets officially shared with the readers. I mean, it's there and it informs my characters' actions, and in that respect, it's totally accessible to the reader. But a lot of it runs in the background, and it gives consistency to what my characters and my political units are doing, even if the reader who recognizes the consistency doesn't understand everything involved in creating it.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that it's part of your subconscious creation process just to have this this worldview that you've formed. I mean, I guess that's true with all artists, writers.
Oh, it's true. It's true of all writers, I think. I have had to make a lot more in the way of copious notes to myself over the last 5-6 books, much more detailed.
You have a consulting group
because
that helps you.
Well, that's true. But you should see my established timeline for the Honorverse at this point. I mean, it says, courier boat departs Manticore for Spindle, blah, blah, blah. And then I go ahead and I enter courier boat from Manticore arrives Spindle at the appropriate time, because the communications loops involved are such that I have to do that to keep track of what's happening simultaneously in multiple places. And that's been one reason for the way in which some of the books cover the same time period from different perspectives, because the delay in information information turnaround and so forth means that we're operating in conjunction with, but isolated from one another in terms of the Talbot Quadrant and what everybody thinks of as the main front, which is now Beowulf, the Beowulf terminus of the Manticore Wormhole Junction, because Beowulf was a founding member of the Solarian League and seceded from it to ally itself with Manticore. And they're right. That will be, the people who see that as the decisive primary front are right in a lot of ways, but over on the secondary front, the home planet of the Mason alignment, which is the puppet master pulling so many strings throughout the Solarian League, has just had a visitation by certain people in Manticoran uniform and Amonite uniform who don't much care for the Mason alignment.
What you were describing is there's a powder keg that's brewing out in the edges of the Solarian League, and it's really a rotten system. And the fuse, to talk about one of the characters in the book, probably not the main hero, but a main character in the book, and somebody I know you like as a character, is Damien Harahop.
Oh, yeah, and I've got some of my fans are like, I don't understand why I like that guy. He's responsible for the death of hundreds of millions of people. And that's really not fair, okay? He just misunderstood. Damien Harahop is sort of, in many ways, a Solarian Victor Kasha. He is comes from a totally different place. Victor is motivated by this absolutely incandescent, unyielding commitment to his core principles as they are represented in the resurgent Republic of Haven. And he's prepared to kill however many people he has to protect those things that he holds as his fundamental core principles. Damien came from a system in which the only way out of the miserable conditions of his family's life was to be co-opted by the system. And as such, he's frankly a brilliant guy. In many ways, he's a polymath, even though he doesn't think of himself that way. He's like an absolute chameleon when it comes to infiltration and whatnot. He clearly understands how the people that he's working with and the people who are his targets think. He's capable of great empathy, even with people who he is ultimately working to, for all intents and purposes, destroy. But I think one thing that some people miss when they're looking at Damien in this book is the original plan. He's He's co-opted by the Mason alignment in addition to having been part of the Solarian League, because he is essentially loaned to the Mason alignment by a corrupt sector governor to help in the effort to destabilize the Talbot Quadrant Talbot sector before it votes to join the Star Empire. And when that operation blows up, there are a lot of people who want to kill Damien because they're tidying up loose ends that could lead the investigation back home in the Solarian League, which what happened in the Talbot sector and at Monica was so egregious that even the Solarian League had to take... It's like, oh, wait, those battle cruisers that our transstellar friend here scrapped for reclamation somehow wound up in the hands of a rogue star nation with all of their original hardware and software still on board. This is like yes, we're going to break up the aircraft carrier enterprise when it reaches the end of its service life. But what we're really going to do is give it a new reactor, put new planes on it, and sell it to Syria. Okay, that's what these guys did. And so even the Solarian League has to take cognizance of that, and there have to be consequences for somebody. And the somebodies in question would really prefer that it's not them, and they see killing Damien as a way to help bury their tracks. So he can't remain an operative of the Solarian Gendarmerie, which is their, for want of a better term, it's their paramilitary police organization. And so he signs on full-time with the Mason alignment. He needs somewhere to go, and they're offering him the most money. So he winds up working for the Mason alignment in something called Operation Janus. And Operation Janus is a Mason op with multiple objectives. It's primarily directed at the star kingdom of Manticore. And its first and primary purpose is to create a perception in the Solarian League that the Star Empire is pursuing a policy of deliberate imperialism out in the fringe, that the expansion into Talbot wasn't an accident, that it was part of a planned, long-standing Manticoran agenda. The reason for that they want to establish that is that it causes the mandarins, the bureaucrats who run the Solarian League, to panic when they think that Manticore is setting out to systematically deprive it of its funding sources in the fringe. And it also sets the stage to demonize Manticore in the eyes of the Solarian League public when Mason and government propagandists they portray all of the carnage and the bloodshed resulting from Solarian policy as being the consequences of Manticoran policy. It's to make the Manties the bad guys in the eyes of the Solarian public. But it goes further than that, because essentially what Operation Janus is a bunch of Mason operatives, one of whom, and arguably the most effective of whom, is Damien Harahap, who present themselves to groups in star systems where the political and economic structure is especially oppressive. These agents present themselves as representatives of Manticore. And they say, we are at war with the Solarian League, and it would therefore obviously be beneficial for us to, divert Solarian attention, etc. We like you guys, so we will support you in your effort to overthrow the local kleptocracy or kick OFS out of the system or shoot the local transstellar and take over its ill-gotten gains, etc., to the extent that we will also provide naval support to protect you if the Solarian Navy tries to put down your domestic revolt. And they're promising this to these people and giving them communications links back to Manticore that actually go back to Mesa or go nowhere at all. And the objective here from the Mason perspective is to get these people to rise in rebellion, call for Manticoran support, and then not get it. And the object is to discredit the Star Empire in the eyes of members of the fringe themselves, to portray Manticore as being willing to promote a revolution that it knows is going to get thousands or even millions of people killed as a cold-blooded ploy, that it has no intention of honoring its promises or anything else. This is solely, we're throwing you into the path of the Solarian League to divert them from us. That's how they want it to be seen. And the object there is to make it, to turn the fringe against Manticore. Obviously, it will make Manticore look even worse to the people in the Solarian League who think of them as conniving Machiavellian expansionist imperialists. It'll make them look even worse. But the other thing that it will do is Manticore enjoys this reputation of being a star nation of its word. If it tells you it will do something, it will do it, which is one reason it doesn't make a whole lot of interstellar obligations, because it plans to fulfill any that it makes, and everybody knows it. So a Manticoran promise of naval support is it's gold in the bank as far as the persons planning these revolts are concerned. And Mesa wants to turn all that gold into lead so that the Star Empire won't be able to continue growing on the one hand, and on the other hand, the Star Empire will not be the attractive alternative to the Renaissance faction, which is the group of star systems that Mesa is planning to use as the core of its new solar polity. So Damien is basically being sent to communicate with these revolutionary groups and to promise them support. So, and by the way, to provide support right up to the moment they call for naval intervention. They're smuggling in small arms. They're smuggling in heavy weapons. Damien is really and truly substantially increasing the odds that these local resistance movements will succeed. Now, he's not necessarily moving the needle far enough to make it likely for them to succeed. And ultimately, if Operation Janus works, even if they do succeed, Frontier Security and the Navy will simply move in to reverse their success. So ultimately, most of these star systems that he is helping are going to be screwed over, even if their revolt succeeds. But Damien hopes most of them will succeed, and he actually points out to his superiors that from Operation Janus's perspective, it would help for some of these operations to succeed because that increases the stature of the Manticoran threat in the perception of the Solarian government and the Solarian public. Damien actually wishes most of the people he's working with well, and he has this sort of mild regret that it's not going to end well for them. But his thinking is, in part, if I don't do this, someone else will.
That was part one of a three-part interview with David Weber, author of Shadow of Victory. Part two will appear next time on the podcast. Now we continue with our complete audiobook serialization of David Drake's The Sea Without a Shore. It seems Cinnabar's chief spymaster is a mother also, and her son is determined to search for treasure in the midst of a civil war. Who better to hold the boy's hand and to take the blows directed at him than Captain Daniel Leary, the Republic of Cinnabar Navy's troubleshooter, and his friend the cyber spy Adele Mundy. The only thing certain in the struggle for control of the mining planet Corsaira is that the rival parties are more dangerous to their own allies than to their opponents. Daniel and Adele face kidnappers, pirates, and a death squad even before they can get to the real business of ending the war on Corsaira and bringing their charge home, maybe along with ancient alien treasure. Now here is the next entry of David Drake's The Sea Without a Shore.
Daniel followed Hogg through the wedge-shaped doorway of the chapel and stutter-stepped before he regained his stride. He really disliked the habit of some people to stop in doorways with others, with Daniel himself behind them. But the sudden wash of peace that came over him had almost made him do the same thing himself. The room was not a rotunda, though the interior floor plan was round. Daniel looked at the ceiling as he walked down the aisle toward the table at the far end. The roof sloped upward to a central tower covered with a frosted skylight. The sides glowed blue, and the metal tracery which strengthened the translucent panels flowed in curves which were themselves soothing. The tall windows between the wall buttresses were of colored glass. Most of them gave the interior a feeling of the blue depths of the sea, though there were swirls and blotches from the whole spectrum visible when Daniel looked directly at the panels. The wall opposite the entrance was red in emphasis, but the light through it was none the less peaceful. "This is the most lovely building I've ever been in," Daniel said to Brother Altgeld. Altgeld smiled. "It was a very peaceful spot from the beginning," the coordinator said. "Our records say that was the reason the chapel was built here." The table at the base of the central aisle was rectangular. Murciello was presumably the man in an Alliance dress uniform with the hollow stars of a colonel on his shoulder boards. He had appropriated one end of the table, and Captain Hockner sat to his right on the long side nearer the entrance. Simona and Tibbs, each with an aide, the regimental aide wore a Pantalarian major's service uniform, were both on the opposite long side. Adele was seated on the right end of the near side, and Sister Rennie was beside Hockner. Daniel started toward the seat between Rennie and Adele. "Please take the end spot, Captain Leary," Altgeld said in a clear voice. "We're gathered to hear your proposals. That place will allow you to address all the principals without turning your head." "I'm not here to listen to somebody telling us to make nice with the Pantalarian oppressors because they're friends of Cinnabar," Murciello said. He glared in challenge at Daniel. The room's acoustics were excellent. Daniel chuckled as he took the place offered to him, but he put his hands on the back of the chair instead of sitting down. "As best I know," he said cheerfully, "my government doesn't have a position on whoever's in charge on Pantelleria, or Corcyra, more to the point. Certainly I don't. I'm here as an entrepreneur, I suppose you'd say." Nobody at the table spoke. Beyond them, the ranks of curving benches would seat about 600 people. Most of the spaces were filled. Apart from the normal creaks and shuffling of a large gathering, the spectators might have been miles away. "Now, I've got a military background, as I'm sure you know," Daniel said. "But it doesn't take an expert to see that the present stalemate is ruining Corcyra. You're shipping about half the copper that you were before the Pantalarians landed, and your prices are lower as well because of the perceived risk in case Pantelleria tries to enforce a real blockade." "They won't," said Captain Simona. "Perceived risk, Captain," Daniel said. "The reduced prices are a matter of record, as you can check as easily as as Adele, did." Murciello muttered something under his breath, but no one interrupted again. "The quickest way to break the stalemate in a good way, good for independent Corcyra, that is to get anti-ship missiles from Karst," Daniel said. "And the best way to do that is to get your envoys back from the jackleg pirates holding them and execute the deal which those envoys have already negotiated." He grinned at his listeners. "You won't do better the next time," he said. "And the folks ruling Karst may well be having second thoughts already. I've dealt with them, remember." "We can't get the envoys back," Murciello said. "Those idiots on Ischia want us to gut the country, give away the next 20 years. "It's not that bad," said Tibbs, glaring at Murciello like a bright-eyed bird. "They want the carrying trade, but their prices—" "They want the trade. Karst wants the trade. Everybody wants a piece of us," Murciello said. He slammed his fist on the table. "Well, they're not going to get it." "Colleagues," Daniel said, "I think—" "Murciello, you were a police sergeant on Pantelleria before you decided to take Alliance money to beat up miners here," said Captain Simona. "Prospering as a thug doesn't make you a statesman." "You can shut your gob now, you stuck-up prick," Murciello said, lurching to his feet. Hockner was standing also. He'd found a replacement for the pistol Hogg had taken away. Now he unbuckled his holster flap with his left hand and put his right on the butt. A transformationist from the nearest benches gripped the back of Hockner's neck with one hand. He twisted his wrist up with the other. The pistol clanked to the floor. Hockner tried to turn but couldn't. His face was turning purple, a combination of strain and fury. The man holding him was easily in his 50s and didn't look particularly strong, but Hockner wasn't going anywhere. The transformationist's face was calm and expressionless. I wonder what he did before he found God, Daniel thought. Altgeld touched the point of Hockner's hip. "Please sit down, Captain," he said. "We take seriously our promise to keep all our guests safe." You certainly saved Hockner's life, Daniel thought. If Hogg or Tovera had stopped the garrison officer, it would have been messier and quite permanent. "Sit down, Hockner," Murciello said, dropping back into his chair. He was angry, but he kept his eyes on the table in front of him. He must have realized that there were hundreds of people in the room with him, and scarcely a soul would mind if he were strapped to the conference table and flayed alive. Hockner sat down beside Brother Altgeld. The man holding him moved back to the bench. He was so nondescript that Daniel wasn't sure he could tell the fellow from those seated to either side of him. Tovera is pretty colorless also, come to think. "I understand your qualms about paying extortion to Ischia," Daniel said. "Apart from anything else, you can't give both Ischia and Karst the same thing, and getting your envoys back won't help unless you have the missiles also." Everyone was looking at him. They looked like fish coming to the surface of a pond when they expect to be fed. "Therefore," Daniel said, "I propose to gain the release of the envoys by my own efforts. I don't require any financial contribution from Corsaira before or after the fact, but I want your agreement to ratify my actions if that becomes necessary. I want it clear that I'm not a pirate." He wasn't lying, but he was allowing his listeners to believe things that he hadn't said. For most of the parties it didn't matter, though as a matter of course, Daniel didn't like to discuss his plans with people who had no reason to know except their curiosity. Murciello and Hockner were another matter. It was important that they believed Daniel was going to attempt the impossible. "Just how do you plan to do this?" Murciello said. "I don't think you can." "You may be correct, of course, Colonel," Daniel said. "But in that case, you haven't lost anything. I mean you personally and the independence movement also. As for my plans," he looked around the table again, still smiling. "I'll say that I hope to release the hostages without violence, but I will use any means which the usage of the civilized galaxy deems to be proper for dealing with pirates, as the Iskians have shown themselves to be." There was silence. Murciello still glowered, but there was a cunning look beneath his hostility. "It appears to me that an attempt to free the prisoners by violence," said Altgeld, "may cause the Iskians to execute them. Or indeed, that the prisoners may be killed in the attempt?" Daniel nodded. "Yes," he said, "those are certainly possibilities. War has risks, life has risks, but I point out," he deliberately shaped his expression and tone on the stern models his father had used when urging the Senate to take a difficult course because the alternatives were worse, "that if you don't achieve the return of the prisoners, the Iskians will offer them to Pantelleria. In fact, I'm surprised that this hasn't happened already, and the Pantellerians will certainly execute them as traitors." "Leary's right," said Administrator Tibbs. "We have nothing to lose." Captain Simona nodded and said, "Yes, Leary's offering the best chance we've had to get our people back and maybe to win this war. Go ahead, I say." Altgeld looked at the garrison commander. "Colonel Murciello," he said, "are you willing for Captain Leary to make the attempt under the auspices of the Independence Council?" Murciello's face worked with suppressed anger. "All right. Waste your time, Leary," he said, "but it is a waste of time, you know." "Then I believe we're done here," Altgeld said. He and Rennie got to their feet. "All of you are welcome to stay with us as long as you like. No one will try to convert you, though I'll warn you that our community here is a very pleasant place to remain." Adele was putting away her data unit. "Thank you," said Daniel. "I need to prepare the ship for liftoff. The sooner we start, the sooner we'll be able to return." Assuming we're not all dead, but Daniel always assumed that he would succeed, and that had generally turned out to be true.
That was another entry in our complete audiobook serialization of The Sea Without a Shore by David Drake. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And a famous blue star coat of high magnitude magnificence and a massive Manticoran starship wedge of key lime pie for David Weber, author of Shadow of Victory. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.